Well, welcome everybody. I have just literally raced back from Wellington, our capital city here in New Zealand. My daughter was in Tournament of the Minds. Does anyone other than Jessica know what that is? I'm trying to assess how international that is. Is it just Australia and New Zealand that do the Tournament of the Minds? Must be
I
Jess.
I asked if it was like Odyssey of the Mind, if you're familiar with that. So it seems maybe.
Maybe? I'm not familiar enough with Odyssey of the Minds to answer that question. All right, well, welcome everybody. Great to connect with you all. Um, Make sure everybody is in. All right, today's masterclass is presented by two colleagues, actually, from back in the day. I worked with both Jessica Humble-Crofts and Andrea Uhl in Frankfurt International School. Andrea's the only one who is still working at Frankfurt International School. Jess and I have both since left, but it's great to be able to all reconnect again, and they're going to share today's masterclass around looking into process in science and how we support skill development. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Jess and Andrea, to get started.
All
Thank
right,
you.
wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. Can someone just give me a thumbs up that you can see the presentation? Fantastic. All right. Well, welcome. Thanks so much, Rachel, for inviting us to present another masterclass. And today's masterclass is called Deepening Student Understanding of Scientific Skills through Concept-Based Inquiry. And of course, I'm here with my great friend and colleague, Andrea, but I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Jessica Humble-Crofts, and I am first and foremost a teacher, an international educator for over 15 years, mostly in the areas of science and mathematics. I'm also an Erickson and Lanning certified concept-based curriculum and instruction trainer for many years now, and I am fortunate enough to serve as the science specialist in the Training Institute. For the past several years, I've also been working very closely with Andrea and Rachel and several other people to develop our concept-based inquiry mathematics. And although I used to work at Frankfurt a long time ago with Rachel and Andrea, I am now a full-time education consultant, coach, and workshop leader. And I fortunately get to visit many schools around the world and work with wonderful teachers. And I also created a few different professional learning courses online for PLI, including one with Andrea, which is called Building Scientific Understanding with a CBI Approach, that we'll talk more about later.
And hello, everybody. I am Andrea Uhl. I share a lot of the qualifications with Jess when it comes to Erickson and Lanning certified concept-based curriculum and instruction trainer, CBI mathematic lead curriculum developer. I, though, am actually full-time in the classroom still. I've spent most of my classroom time in upper elementary and have recently made the switch in the past few years to lower elementary early years, which I've really enjoyed that challenge. Another one of my passions that I am really excited to share is illustrating, and I actually had the opportunity to illustrate concept-based inquiry in action. So you might be familiar with a lot of my doodles and thinking as I try to change ideas into images. Just a quick note, as we're getting started, please refrain from taking screenshots or recordings, only taking notes or recordings for your own personal use. All right? So let's jump into today's session. Jess and I always have a lot to say, and we want to make sure that we get time to share with you and hear some of your ideas as well. So our guiding questions for today's masterclass are: why is it vital to teach students the how and why of what we do as scientists? The next question is, what does it look like to teach process-based conceptual understandings in a CBI classroom, science classroom? And finally, what does intending for the continuous development of science processes look like? So you might want to have a pen and paper nearby, as we will have a few times that we ask you to stop and reflect. So since this is such a content-dense area of learning, it's really important that we spend some time and actually think about what it's like being a scientist and don't let it take a back seat. So we're going to kick off by asking, why is it vital to teach students the how and why of what we do as scientists? Everybody get your chat open. We are going to start by sharing a little bit about our own beliefs and classroom practices about teaching the how and why of science. So it's kind of a four-corner debate that we're going to do. So you can write in the chat if you agree with the statement that I put up, or if you disagree, or perhaps if you strongly agree or disagree. And you can put that in the chat. And then I want you to put the little because, I disagree because, and give a short explanation of your thinking. All right, chat's open. And here is our first question, or statement, sorry. Memorization of science facts is sufficient for students to succeed academically. Do you agree? Disagree? Strongly? Why or why not? Few ideas popping up in the chat, giving everybody time to write out their thinking about why. So we've got a lot of disagree and strongly disagree. Some of people are saying science is the subject that they need to explore, experiment to understand. Science is evolving all the time. Can't just learn a bunch of facts if it keeps changing, right? Disagree. There's no deep learning, no deep thinking, no transferable knowledge. Let's see, I'll pick one more.
I also like, it's not fun. It's not fun to just memorize things.
Right. Yeah. All right, let's try another one. All right. New thinking. I have to teach students how to collect, record, and graph data year after year after year. Do you agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or strongly agree? I'd love to hear why some of you are thinking of why you're agreeing or disagreeing.
I see. I wish I didn't have to, but I do.
I also see agreeing because I need to reinforce the skills.
Mm-hmm.
Overall observation that skills need time to develop. Review is needed. We have sort of a range of agreeing and disagreeing, and the reasoning behind it is quite interesting for people too. And it could also be depending on the role you're in, why you're thinking if you're agreeing or disagreeing, because students should be building on their prior knowledge instead of restarting from scratch each year they disagree. Brushing up each year. Okay. Do you see any more that you want to share, Jess?
Oh, I didn't see any more. I mean, there are lots more, but I didn't read them all yet. Yeah, I like all the comments about they need to be building on their prior knowledge instead of restarting every year.
Mm-hmm.
Once taught with near transfer, revisiting these every year is sufficient. All right,
Yeah.
shall we
And
move to the
higher
next
grade
one?
students have developed a skill set, so we don't have to reteach that skill set every year.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's see what you think about this one. I am confident that my students understand why scientists document details of investigations in a lab report. Depending on where you're teaching, you might be in the early elementary and it's just during an investigation. You might be thinking later on it's the details of a lab report. So just think of where you are and what context that might be. But are you confident that your students understand why scientists document details of investigations? If you're a curriculum coordinator or a school leader, you might also just be thinking, do my students even know that? Do they? Am I confident that my students understand why?
Yeah, I just saw one in there that often students are just doing it because it's a requirement, but they don't really understand what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Lab reports are locked into IA in IBDP. It's more of how much can I score?
Mm-hmm. Agree. Often experiments fail, so students can refer to their notes, reflect, and try again. Okay. Neutral. Neutral might be, yeah. It might even be that. I don't know if I have my students document details of investigations. That could be another part that we're looking at. I'm not sure if
Oh, here's a really good one. What evidence will show that I know that the students understand? How will I know that they understand? I'm not sure whether to agree or disagree.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. It looks like we're in a really good place because this is where we want to spend some time talking about our students and why we do what we do as scientists. So, all right. You might be familiar with this. This is Dr. Erickson's structure of knowledge and Dr. Landing's structure of process. They are the frameworks that help us see how knowledge and process are organized. They are both bottom-up models. As you see in the structure of knowledge on the left, we start with facts, which are framed by a topic, and then concepts are drawn out from the topic and facts, which are joined together in a statement of relationship, a generalization or a conceptual understanding. Sorry. I got a frog in my throat this morning. The structure of process, so on the right side, sits on a foundation of processes, strategies, and skills. And just like the structure of knowledge, it moves up to concepts and generalizations. In this structure, in the structure of process, we move from doing to understanding why we do what we do. Now, in general, we can classify each subject or discipline as being sort of knowledge-based or process-based. Like science, humanities, mathematics, and health are all classified as sort of knowledge-based subjects that require examining facts and knowledge in order to understand concepts and form generalizations. On the other hand, literacy, languages, arts, PE, design are classified as process-based subjects as they require students to examine, and use skills and strategies and processes in order to understand concepts and form generalizations. But the classification is not as clear-cut. The subjects actually sit within both structures. In reality, this is a better representation of how the subjects sit in the structures. Notice that science is still sitting more on the structure of knowledge, but it is also in the structure of process. Students will also learn to act and think and feel like scientists. In our classrooms, this would mean that all subjects should have both knowledge and process-based conceptual understandings.
All right, so we know that science is built on a foundation of both knowledge and process, with a heavier focus on knowledge. You may already be familiar with knowledge-based conceptual understandings in science, but maybe you haven't thought through developing process-based conceptual understandings yet, or maybe you're just stuck in teaching the skills. So let's have a look at some knowledge and process-based conceptual understandings and see if you can spot the difference. Firstly, here are some knowledge-based conceptual understandings. So in a high school class, students understand that waves can add or cancel one another as they cross, depending on their relative phase, but emerge unaffected by each other. Or perhaps in a middle school class, students understand that predatory interactions may reduce the number of organisms or eliminate whole populations of organisms. Or in a primary school class, Students understand that pushing or pulling on an object can change the speed or direction of its motion and can start or stop it. I'm sure you can all imagine a topic or a unit that each of these conceptual understandings would belong to. But let's have a look at some process-based conceptual understandings. Make sure you look out for what is different from the ones that you've just seen. Students understand that scientists evaluate the benefits and limitations of different models of the same proposed tool, process, mechanism, or system in order to select or revise a model that best fits the design criteria. Here's another one. Students understand that scientists formulate conclusions based on observed patterns in data. And finally, here's a third one. Students understand that scientists use clear labels, symbols, and annotations in diagrams so that others can understand the information easily. What do you notice is different about the knowledge-based understandings from the process-based understandings? You can put your thinking in the chat. What is different between these two sets of understandings? All of these understandings could possibly be in your science class, could be in a unit, not all of them in the same unit, obviously.
Or the same year.
So they could be, yeah. So, but how are the ones on the left-hand side different from the ones on the right-hand side? Okay, we've got facts versus the how. We've got process gearing towards the scientific method.
With process-based are more general.
More
general.
Leads to knowing limitations. Process focuses on the skills and the how we do it. The knowledge-based understandings are more specific about the facts, and the other ones are more general.
Process-based concepts are more about science in context.
Oh, I like this one. The process-based understandings can be used across strands of science.
And I have someone here, Sue, that's saying that they're transferable. The process-based understandings are transferable.
All right, so you are mostly right on the money. So you've noticed that the knowledge-based understandings are indeed built on the knowledge concepts and are tied to a specific area of learning within science. So although each of these understandings are transferable ideas, each one belongs to an area of science, like a specific physics or ecology unit, for example. Whereas these process-based understandings are broadly transferable across any learning area within science. They're not tied to a specific piece of content in any unit. So, for example, that last conceptual understanding, scientists use clear labels, symbols, and annotations in diagrams so that others can understand the information easily, could be taught in a unit on weather patterns, or it could be taught in a unit on living things, or in a unit on properties of matter. I think you passed your frog to me, Andrea, in my throat.
I know, I'm sorry. So there are actually a lot of skills, practices, and dispositions for students to learn about in science. What are some of the processes, skills, or practices that we think students need to learn to feel, act, and think like scientists? Let's get just enter a bunch and hit enter in the chat. Let's see if we can get a big, long list going of what are we thinking these skills, processes, and practices are. I always love the moment it takes for the first person to hit enter. Observing, observation skills, learn to question, observational skills, critical thinking skills, forming a hypothesis, observing and asking questions, data recording, analysis, scientists form hypotheses to test, open-mindedness, inquiry skills, design process, problem poser, interpretation of data. Ooh, nice list going there. Review, cause and effect, measurements, evaluation, testing theories. We could just spend a lot of time writing this, right? So here are some. Can you spot some of them that we've already listed? Can you see any that we didn't list? These are just some of the skills and processes that we tend to link to planning and conducting and reporting on investigations. But there's more. There's so much more. Can you spot any of these that you wrote? Oh, our creative thinking one got a little smushed in there.
There's just so many we can't even fit them on one slide.
I know. There you go. Move it over there. Yeah, in fact, most of the skills, practices, and dispositions learned in science are very transferable to real life. So it is vital that the heavy knowledge side of our science curriculum is not the only area of focus. As educators, we need to develop scientific thinking. Science isn't just a collection of facts. It's a way of asking questions and testing ideas. Teaching how and why we do certain things helps students see science as a process of discovery, not memorization. We also need to encourage critical thinking and skepticism. Students must learn to question evidence, look for bias, and avoid taking claims at face value, a skill that's useful well beyond the science classroom. We also need to prepare students as problem solvers. They're going to need to address many challenges that our world faces, like climate change, public health, or technology ethics. Students need to know not just facts, but how to investigate problems and how science matters in everyday decisions. We also need to show science as human and evolving. Students must see that science is a creative, ongoing endeavor shaped by reasoning, evidence, and sometimes even mistakes, not only a fixed body of knowledge.
Okay, so now that we've discussed the importance of the how and why, let's think about this question. What does it look like to teach process-based conceptual understandings in a CBI science classroom? Well, firstly, during the planning phase, educators need to develop process-based conceptual understandings to use as learning targets in the context of the unit. Skills and knowledge are still fundamental to developing understanding and will be part of the learning journey as well. But by starting with the end in mind, educators have a clearer picture of where they're heading. So let's see what this process of writing these understandings looks like. To develop a process-based conceptual understanding, we start from the bottom of the structure of process, at this process, strategies, and skills level in that bottom box. We identify either a process, a skill, or a strategy that we want students to deeply understand. From there, we're going to draw out or identify concepts that are related to that process, skill, or strategy, the ones that we really want students to focus on. And then we develop statements of relationships between the concepts, or conceptual understandings or generalizations. This statement explains how the concepts are connected and will be used as a learning target.
So let's take a look in a classroom. Let's imagine that we are a fifth grade classroom teacher doing a unit on energy and motion. During this unit, students will be conducting several experiments to learn about forces, motion, and energy, so it's a perfect time to develop a process understanding of the relationship between variables and fair testing. So during planning, in addition to developing several knowledge-based conceptual understandings, those that are about forces and motion and energy, we also need to consider important processes, skills, and develop process-based understandings. In this case, we want to help students deeply understand how fair testing and variables are related. So we start from the process of fair testing. From there, we draw out the concepts of variable, scientist, manipulation, reliability, and fair test. And from there, we take two or more of the concepts to be combined and to form a conceptual understanding. Here, we've combined and we've developed the understanding. We understand that scientists control, change, and measure variables to ensure fair testing. And now we have a conceptual understanding that we can use as a learning target. Notice again at this point that the conceptual understanding doesn't have anything to do with energy or motion, the context of the unit. Instead, it is broadly applicable to all areas of science, and it's not stuck in this particular unit. Remember, this learning target is not one we will give to students. We won't take a deductive approach and simply tell the students the relationship, hey, scientists control, change, and measure for testing, and then have them conduct an experiment to prove that we're right. Similarly, we won't give students a definition of different types of variables up front and just ask them to memorize the definitions. In concept-based inquiry classroom, we use an inductive approach as much as we can by planning a learning pathway using questions and carefully selected examples or case studies to support students in identifying patterns and finding connections between the concepts. And then we guide them to be able to articulate these understandings themselves. If you want to read more about the inductive approach, check out Chapter 2 in the Concept-Based Inquiry and Action book by Marshall and French.
With this inductive approach in mind, there are many ways that this could look in a concept-based inquiry classroom. It might start by engaging the hearts and minds of our students, by setting out various energy and motion-related provocations, including some ramps, some small cars and balls, and so on. As students explore, we would take note of the ideas they share and the skills they exhibit. We also may start with an experiment similar to one they've done in a previous unit to observe the connections they make to prior learning and listen to their questions. After that, we might want to zoom in on this process-based understanding about variables and fair testing, because we know that our students will be able to get more out of other experiments in the unit if they have a deep understanding of this first. To start, students will need to develop a shared understanding of the term variable in the context of an experiment or investigation. In particular, those words control, intentionally change, and measure. We could use examples of experiments like recipes for the best pancakes, when we might ask, what was kept the same in each recipe? What was changed on purpose in each recipe? And what was observed or measured in each recipe? Then we might have a look at a runner's performance in 4 different races, when we again would ask the same questions. What was kept the same in each race? What was changed on purpose in each race? And what was observed or measured in each race? Through several examples, students would develop a shared understanding of the different types of variables, the one that we intentionally change, the one that we measure, and the ones we keep the same. Now we'd need to give students more case studies or examples that show the links between these concepts. So although the best pancake scenario was engaging and helped students quickly relate to a familiar situation, we really want to come back to our topic of study. So looking at energy and motion. We could perform a ball drop experiment or a marble collision experiment, or both. As teachers, we'll use carefully crafted guiding questions to help students shift between the knowledge-based context of energy and motion and this targeted process-based understanding. In each experiment that we do, we'll use the same questions. What was measured, what was controlled, and what was intentionally changed. And then to help students connect these variables to fair testing, we might ask, can you tell what caused the change? Or why not? Now students must consider how and why students do what they do. Why is fair testing important? How can we make these experiments fair tests? What might happen if we didn't plan a fair test? Then we can guide our students to articulate their understanding by asking a question like, how do scientists conduct fair tests? Finally, we want students to transfer their learning. So let's pull out our ramps and our little cars again and investigate how ramp height might affect how far a car travels. And because we want to transfer our understanding, our process-based understanding here, we might ask, how will scientists ensure fair testing in this experiment? This is the students' turn to put their new understanding into action. Not only will they need to explain how a scientist will ensure a fair test, but they'll actually need to do it. So let's review this example. How did that teacher in this grade 5 class teach this important process? Well, first, they identified their target process-based conceptual understanding. Then they used the energy and motion context of the unit to help students meaningfully engage in the science skills and processes. This certainly wasn't a standalone how to be a scientist unit. Next, they planned and asked thoughtful guiding questions to support students' thinking, pattern recognition, and generalizing about this process-based understanding. Here are some of the many questions we may have asked. Note that the questions, just like the understanding, are not tied to the specific context of the experiment. They are transferable and could be completely used in a completely different unit. In fact, you can continue to use these questions in other units when supporting students to think about fair testing in the future. In the classroom, students were then asked to transfer and apply their understanding by developing and conducting a fair test. Of course, this is only one process-based understanding. The entire unit, the motion and energy unit, would actually contain several knowledge-based understandings and another 1 or 2 process-based understandings, and it would span several weeks of learning. So this is not all happening just in one teaching period. So as you can see, teaching science processes and skills requires thoughtful planning and dedicated time in the context of each science topic of study. And we want to point out that this does not look like these things. It does not look like a single out-of-context unit solely devoted to being a scientist or the scientific method and just doing experiments for experiment's sake. It does not look like trying to do all of the science processes and skills in every single science unit every year. And it doesn't look like relying on a template or organizer for students to fill out and then assuming that they will understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it. This quote from the National Research Council captures these ideas really well. It says, "Students cannot fully understand scientific and engineering ideas without engaging in the practices of inquiry and the discourses by which such ideas are developed and refined. At the same time, they cannot learn or show competence in practices except in the context of specific content." And while sometimes we may need to pause and zoom in on a skill to really explore the intricacies of it, this should be done during a contextualized unit so that the context of that unit can provide the content for the skill or practice. All right, so let's take a moment to pause and reflect. As we considered what the teaching of conceptual understandings about science processes might look like, let's take a few notes for yourself. What is one science skill or practice? So I want you to think about a unit that you've got coming up that you could focus on more deeply in either something you're teaching next week or something that's coming up in your next unit. And how might you do that? Just take a few moments to write down how that would look for you. You don't need to put it in the chat. You can if you want to. And just maybe take some personal notes there.
Jess, do we want to give a 2-minute
Sure.
timer? Okay. It's hard to not talk, so I'll set a timer for us.
Okay.
some people are starting to put theirs in the chat. If you want to see what other people have written, you can read those. We have about 30 seconds left.
I really like how people who are sharing are telling us about the skill or process and then also providing the context in which they're going to focus on. That's really awesome. So that's great because that means that our message here about connecting and having a context for teaching these skills and processes is hitting home.
All right, 2 minutes.
That's 2 minutes already? Wow, that was fast. I'm impressed that we actually didn't talk for the first minute and 30 seconds, Andrea.
Yeah.
All right,
Yes.
so we've got some people talking about evaluating and critiquing models in the context of the renal system, and just doing investigations in the context of plant growth and structure, converting raw data to process data and the analysis. I wonder, Ramia, which context you're going to be teaching that through. We've got a solubility unit where we're going to be looking at observational skills. Lots of great ideas here.
Maybe some of your classrooms.
Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah. So let's go on to our last question for our masterclass today. And it's, what does intentional planning for the continuous development of science processes look like? Like, how do we ensure depth and breadth and maintain the rigor of science practices across our school? As we shared earlier, there are a lot of processes, skills, or practices that students need to learn to feel, act, and think like scientists. And like many other subjects, it might feel like it cannot all fit in. But before I jump into this question, you might be wondering, how do we know which skills and processes to teach? And where can we find them? I'm so glad you asked. Here's a few places that you could look. The Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS, is a set of standards developed in the United States, but has been widely adopted by international schools across the world. NGSS describes 8 practices for science classrooms that you can see here, like asking questions, developing and using models, planning and carrying out investigations. But these broad practices are broken further down into vertically articulated skills, which might be a great place for you to start. This is actually where Jess and I tend to start as well. So here you're going to see practice 2, developing and using models, and how the NGSS has broken it down across 4 grade bands. Just take a moment to read a few of these skills.
If you can, because the text is teeny, 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 tiny.
What you want to be seeing is that progression and the addition of more specific contexts or concepts as we move up. And you can literally see even just the sentences themselves, if you can't read it, they actually get longer and more specific as we go through. Let's see, what is the...
Oh, did you want to read one? Sorry.
No, I just want to see every time the skills are building on previous grade levels. Yeah. I was just seeing what the chat was. I had to move the screen to see it. That's okay. Now, there might be other curriculum documents that you currently use, such as the PYP subject continuum for science, or the MYP science progression of learning, or even your country's national curriculum. Or perhaps your school has their own scope and sequence document where they've articulated these. All of these are a great place to start when determining which skills and practices should be taught in your class. Now, once you've articulated the skills, processes, and practices your school will incorporate into their science scope and sequence, it should be planned and mapped out, just like the knowledge. We don't want learning to happen by fortunate accident. We want learning happening as a result of well-planned, vertically aligned, and articulated curriculum. So when we say, what does intentional planning for the continuous development of science processes look like? It means vertically moving up through the grade levels and horizontally across each grade level. You don't want to repeatedly teach a skill over and over again. Rather, we want to drill down into the micro concepts, ensuring that we are adding the appropriate amount of rigor for the age and development of the students and deepening their understanding of that skill or process. What this might really look like. Look at these understandings right here. So let's consider, these are conceptual understandings from grades 2, 5, and 9. Scientists use to show how things work. Scientists create models to demonstrate phenomena. Scientists create models to help explain phenomena. What do you notice about these three understandings? Yeah, do you see it? They are very similar. Like, what's the new learning about models in each grade? How are we intentionally deepening students' understanding of how and why scientists use models? There is little to no increase in the complexity or development of the skill of modeling happening here. When you write process-based conceptual understandings, think carefully about the new learning the students are doing at each grade level you teach. Imagine how well developed the skill of modeling would be in your students if instead they were working towards these understandings. Scientists make models to show how things work in the natural and designed world. Scientists create and use models to describe and predict phenomena that cannot be seen with human eyes. Scientists develop complex models that allow for manipulation and testing of a proposed process or system. Notice how even though we are working on modeling at each of these grades, additional concepts related to modeling are added, and different relationships are explored, which adds complexity and deepens understanding of the process of scientific modeling. Having a clearly articulated scientific skills and process scope and sequence for your school is really important so that we can ensure we are adding something to students' ability to feel, act, and think as scientists each year.
So finally, when we talk about fitting it all in, let's have a quick chat about writing lab reports or experiment reports, something that's near and dear to many of our hearts. Maybe not so much when we have to come to grading them, though. We often see students as young as grade 2 being required to write some form of a lab report or investigation report every time they conduct an experiment in a science unit. In middle schools, students are often required to write several full multi-page lab reports per year. And although we do need to build students' capacity to write a full lab report by high school, it is not necessary to do so every single time they investigate something prior to that moment. If students have to write whole entire lab reports every time, we will only be skimming the surface, not helping students deeply understand the how and the why of the multitude of processes and skills involved in planning, conducting, and reporting scientific investigations. If you remember that slide from earlier with all of those different skills and processes that are involved with planning, conducting, and reporting on scientific investigations, there isn't any way we can attend with any kind of depth to all of those if students are writing full lab reports every single time they do an experiment. So,
Or just if they're filling in the template that you've given them, right? Like,
absolutely.
Just fill them in.
So while lab reports play a crucial role in fostering scientific literacy and skills development, it's important to recognize that expecting students to produce full lab reports for every single unit may not be appropriate, especially in middle school or earlier. Instead, educators can strategically integrate aspects of lab report writing throughout the curriculum, focusing on specific skills and areas of refinement tailored to students' developmental readiness. So as an example, imagine that the teacher, in an experiment, the teacher could supply the experiment instructions or the procedure. And the teacher could also supply the collected data, where in this particular unit, you really want students to heavily focus on calculations, on data presentation, and developing a claim statement. That's not the only example. We could also supplied different parts of the experiment to have students deeply work on one of the other areas. By breaking down the components of lab reports and scaffolding instruction accordingly, teachers can effectively support students in mastering essential scientific practices without totally overwhelming them with excessive writing tasks. This approach ensures that the benefit of lab reports are maximised while also promoting a more manageable and equitable learning experience for all students. So I want you to think back earlier to the reflection point when we asked you to select a skill or a process that you could deepen or refine in an upcoming unit. And I want you to think about, do you actually know what's being taught in the grade level before about that skill or process? And what about the grade after? And where can you find that information out? What does that look like in your school context? Because everything we've been talking about today requires us to know what this learning journey looks like. So just take a moment to reflect on that.
Should I set a timer, Jess?
Maybe only a minute for that one.
Okay.
I would kind of want to add an extra question here. How many people get time to meet across grade levels with their teachers in the grade level below and above? I know for sure in many schools that I've worked at that was not often a priority.
Often just the curriculum coordinator gets that opportunity.
Very rare. What weekly runs? That's awesome, Amber Guy. And then I saw lots of people saying that they can find all this information in their curriculum documents. And I want to point one thing out that I noticed as we were scanning through the PYP and the MYP documents, if you happen to teach in an IB school. And I noticed that the ambiguity of the language in a lot of those documents means that there's a lot open to teacher interpretation. And so just looking at those documents alone would not supply me as like a 6th grade or an 8th grade teacher with enough information to know what exactly was being developed in the grade level before or after me. For example, I noticed in the MYP documentation that it says investigating scientific or creating scientific investigations. And it says that in every single one of the MYP descriptors. And whilst that's true, what does that actually look like in MYP 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? How do I know what is going on before and coming after me so that I can make sure I'm developing that skill or that process really well and adding to what's already happened before? So that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in what that looks like at your school. I know that I've never really been in a situation that has been really well catered to. And I think we need to try and find some more time for that. All right. So
I think in the elementary school, we tend to,
go ahead, Andrea.
well, in the elementary school as well, what we tend to do is like, okay, well, we need to observe. And so sort of like, what is observing? And each grade level has some observing things happening, but it's not really clear of what's happening and how it's deepening their understanding of why we're observing or how we're doing it.
All right, so as we reach the end of the masterclass, we hope you continue to think about the importance of teaching students the how and the why of what we do as scientists. Ultimately, we have to dedicate time to developing understandings of science processes and skills, and then carefully planning and articulating the student's learning journey. We also need to provide students with multiple examples and case studies of science processes and skills in a context. And within grade levels and across the school, we must ensure that we are actually developing and deepening their science skills and not simply repeating them. Now, if you have had your interest piqued in anything that we've been talking about today, because we had so much more we wanted to share, we had to cut down about half of our presentation. We are starting our course that we wrote together, the new cohort of our course, on October 6th. It's coming up soon. And we would love you to join us to investigate what teaching science in the class in a CBI, where the CBI approach looks like we have a lot of fun in the course. It is super intense and we dig really deep and ask some hard questions, but we believe it's for a great course. Andrea, what do you want to add to that plug?
We do. We always, when it comes to doing a master class, we're like, how can we boil this down to 1 hour? There is so much that we want to talk to you guys about. And even just now in our comments, it's like I want to have more conversations with so many of you about how we can make these things, how we can do these changes together. So we'd love for you to join us for that. And we're really happy that you joined us today. And we're
Thank you
happy
so
now.
much.
We have a few more minutes that if we want, if there's any questions out there, that we could take them now.
There is one question. Is the course for all school levels, PYP and MYP?
It
Yes.
absolutely is. Yeah. It has examples ranging right down from the kindergarten right up to a DP classes. We have been very specific about making sure that we're showing contextualized examples, because we know that that's how we learn, from all areas of the school. And we've had in the past had people from all ends of the school, and it's been wonderful. It's great for us to hear from teachers at different ends of the school to be able to see how concept-based inquiry works and serves them in the classroom.
I'm just going to pull the link for that. While I'm getting the link for the course and popping that in the chat, you can visit our website, Professional Learning International, for anyone who's watching the replay. There was a question that came up earlier, and it was, how can we make a unit on energy more transdisciplinary? And probably, if you're interested in that, we actually also have a course on integrated curriculum and the difference between transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary. The IB tend to use those terms fairly interchangeably, but in concept-based, we're a little bit more distinct. I think probably in this case, if you're working on a unit on energy, it would be what are the opportunities for interdisciplinary learning in a unit. I think, Andrea, have you done a unit on energy?
Yeah. So I've taught 4th and 5th grade with energy before. So I would have to go and look in to be interdisciplinary more is what I think about that, is what disciplines are meaningful in this unit. So for me, we had definitely science, right? We have our science, our knowledge, and our process pieces. And then I think, well, what else is happening here? We had some research skills in nonfiction. We had some understandings that would be connected to that. So we have some process skills related to using texts to research. We also pulled in art, and we thought about how we could use our energy to create art. Think Jackson Pollock and throwing paint around. And those actually ended up being experiments that we could use back in our classroom later in that aspect. And those were the 3 subjects that really were coming into focus when I wanted to be interdisciplinary there. We also had some math skills when it came to looking at our distances that cars traveled, or how I want to say what's the thing that measures sound?
Decibels?
Decibel, like the reader of those. We would also compare the values of like less than and greater than, even into decimals, and how we use those. So it became a great opportunity to transfer what we understood about numbers and their values and use that in the context of our experiments. Anything you'd add to that, Jess?
No, that sounds amazing. I was thinking about it more from a lens of maybe in the MYP, if you were looking for some interdisciplinary connections to do with energy, for example. There's a lot of connections around population studies, sustainability, around choice, around the environmental impacts of different energy choices, how different people around the world are using energy and making decisions around energy and policy. So there's lots and lots of different ways that we could bring in some of the humanities subjects in with the sciences around that, and then also around that sort of ethical choice piece. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's very flexible, but as Andrea said, this is
We've
probably
got
the
a
most
few ideas
important
as
point.
well in the chat.
Yeah, the most important point is that whenever we think about interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary learning, we really want to be thinking about how we're adding value to the student's understanding of that topic or of that idea or that problem, and not just pushing learning together for the sake of it, but what is adding value. And I think Rachel's put the link for the course. A couple of people were asking for that, Rachel.
Yep,
Yes,
it's
I
in
put
there.
that in the chat.
I'm just making sure that we didn't miss any major questions. How do you join the course? I love the I really appreciate the comment that I saw earlier that said something like, I'm going to replan my lesson for tomorrow right now. So that made
That's fantastic.
super awesome.
Inspired.
Thank you.
Jess, I also really appreciated you mentioned earlier that the wonderful thing about process-based understandings is that they transfer from one science unit to the next in a way that often knowledge-based units won't come around again until we build on that the next year or something like that. But these process-based understandings will transfer from one unit to the next, and that idea of revisiting the guiding questions that relate to process so that we're very intentionally not just going, right, we're done with observing now, we're moving on to modeling, but we're actually continuing to link back to the understandings that have been previously established.
Absolutely. And if you're recording some of those sort of key ideas or making a concept bank on your wall or using some of those questions to capture that thinking, again, because this is something that comes up over and over again, students have that facing them to help remind and support them as they re-enter using that skill at a later time, which we know that they're going to do over and over again, but we don't want to reteach it every time. We just want to support them in transferring.
Yeah, fantastic.
I see another question.
Oh, I love questions.
This one is actually a great one. It's about writing objectives on the board. So
Ooh.
when we're teaching science inductively, do we still need to write the lesson objectives on the board as some teachers might be asked to do, or as we've traditionally done? And
Pick
if
me.
not, what could we do differently?
Did you pick
Jess.
me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. So ideally, not ideally, in a concept-based curriculum instruction classroom, when we're doing inquiry, like we talked about earlier, we want to use an inductive method as much as possible, which would mean not showing the students the target understanding at all ever. What it does mean is in our planning side, the teachers are planning that conceptual understanding so that they know exactly where we want our students to be. And you might work in a school that requires you to put some sort of learning objective on your board at the beginning, and that's okay, but it doesn't have to be in the form of a conceptual understanding or a statement. It could be in the form of a question. So it could be in the form of, I've thought about my target conceptual understanding. I know what questions are going to help guide and scaffold the process of learning to get there. And I'm going to write one or two of those key guiding questions on my board at the beginning of this learning period, because that is my learning target, right? That's the thing that's going to help us get to where we need to be. So most often your school, if it requires you to put a learning target on the board, I have very rarely, if ever, seen a school require it to be a statement with a full stop, which means that it could be a question with a question mark, which straight away invites student thinking, which straight away gets those little brains ticking over and thinking about other things they can connect to, and still meets the requirement of posting a learning objective. The end.
Yeah.
So
The same
in
as
our example,
yeah,
I was just want to say, in that grade 5 classroom that we gave about fair testing, we literally could have put on the board just how do scientists conduct fair tests? Or maybe I would have even written, like, in an experiment, can you tell what caused a change? Right? So getting them thinking about that, and we know that those are the things we're going to be investigating, and that will be so much more meaningful to our students.
the same
Great
is
question.
true.
Great question.
Yes, indeed. The same is true if you're in a school where you're required to write something that starts with we are learning to, this is because, and that very traditional structure. I always say to people, go back to your leadership team and ask them what's the purpose, and do that not in a way that's challenging or aggressive. Just say, help me understand why you want me to display the learning objectives. I've been really thinking about it and I'd love you to share your thinking behind it. And then ask them, so if the purpose effectively is so that students are clear on what they will be learning in that lesson, can I make it a question? because when I flip it to a question, students start thinking, and that's what I want happening in my classroom. So if you've got that kind of more structured, you would gently just challenge the leadership team to say, like, what is the purpose? What does the research say about sharing learning intentions or sharing learning objectives in a more traditional way? And it all comes back to making sure that the teacher and the student are clear on what we'll be doing in the lesson, what they'll be getting out of it, what they should be able to do by the end of the lesson. But what they should be able to do by the end of the lesson is answer the question. So by the end of this lesson, we'll be able to answer these questions.
All right.
All right. I think that's it for the questions. So thank you so much to everyone who has joined us today. We are trying something new. It is brand new as of the team told me about it on Friday afternoon. They said at the end of this masterclass, when I close down the link or end the session, what will happen is that a survey should pop up for you. We hope it does. We would really, truly appreciate you just taking a couple of minutes. It's a short survey to give us feedback that helps us to continue to refine. And I also believe that there is a bonus for those who complete the survey. There is a discount on the science course. So go ahead and do that. Should only take a couple of minutes. And we really appreciate and value your responses. So thanks everyone. Huge thank you to Jessica and Andrea for all the work and thought and preparation that went into this masterclass. It's wonderful to connect with you again. And thank you all of you for showing up on your weekend to join us and learn more about